Beethoven by Shane Koyczan. Listen, his father made a habit out of hitting him. See, some men drink, some men yell, some men hit their children. This man did it all. Because I guess all men want their boys to be geniuses. Beethoven, little boy, living in a house where a name meant nothing. Living in a house where mercy had to be earned through each perfect note, tumbling up through the roof to tickle the toes of angels. So at the very beginning itself, we see that the poet is commanding, listen, so that the reader deeply and attentively listen to and absorb the emotional essence of Beethoven's iconic music. Because according to him, Beethoven is what his music is. Therefore, if you understand his music, you will get to know everything about Beethoven. His love, his hatred, all his emotions are deeply embedded in his music, in his compositions. Beethoven's father was a piano teacher, and it was a musical family in which they belonged to. And therefore, he was very keen about making his child a perfect musician. And therefore, he was very rash and cruel with him to quite an extent in which we won't approve of it. So child abuse comes out through the words that habit of hitting. So not just his father had drinking habits or some other bad habits, but he used to yell, hit, and he used to be very harsh with his words even. And those harsh words got ingrained in his brain, in his mind, in his soul, and Beethoven just couldn't come out of it. That he wasn't enough, his music wasn't good enough. This ingrained domestic violence establishes the atmosphere of terror, unpredictability, and pain in Beethoven's childhood home. Beethoven's father was equally brutal in hitting his son and in many other aspects. He was just not at all kind, or his gestures were not at all near about to what we will call as kindness or generosity or out of love, which actually a child needs. So every parent in some way wants their children to be great, and it was to his father, Beethoven's father, took it to a much farther extent in which he's harbored intense ambitions for his son to become a legendary musical genius, just like Mozart, his contemporary, was. And therefore, he just didn't choose any kind path, any kindness in that aspect. The father imposed these unrealistic expectations on Beethoven in a damaging manner through violence and verbal attacks. He wanted to transform his child into a prodigy, in which he was not just couldn't or was not allowed to make any mistakes, and every note must be made perfect to earn his father's compassion to the least, which was still unavailable or unspoken and unexpressed. So Beethoven was a young, small, helpless boy living in a home where his destiny, where his identity, self-worth, and humanity were completely disregarded and minimized. So he had to earn small moments of conditional mercy or affection through flawlessly playing the piano with technical precision, irrespective of his age. The musical notes played by Beethoven are therefore visualized to be energetically rising up through the roof of the house, joyfully escaping to the heavens, where they delightfully tickle the toes of the angels playing their ethereal harps. So as if his music was it was so enticing and so engrossing that it even affected or poked the angels themselves. So coming back to the poem, through the roof to tickle the toes of angels whose harps couldn't hold half the passion that was held in the hands of a young boy who was hard of hearing. Beethoven, who heard his father's anthem every time he put finger to ivory, it was not good enough. So he played slowly, not good enough. So he played softly, not good enough. So he played strongly, not good enough. And when he could play no more, when his fingers cramped up into the gnarled roots of tree trunks, it was not good enough. So the speaker imagines even the angelic harps which weren't equal to his compositions and weren't able to capture half the raw human passion infused in the music that young Beethoven produced, which poured from his talent hands. It is also revealed Beethoven was losing his sense of hearing even as a boy. So he was hard of hearing. He had some kind of hearing impairment. And whenever Beethoven attempted to play piano to please his father, the voice of his stern father declaring that his effort was inadequate and not good enough. He played in Beethoven's mind this utterance of his father, not good enough, played, reverberated, and resonated in Beethoven's mind like a repetitive anthem or scolding refrain, and Beethoven constantly faced impossible standards of perfection. No matter how he played, how he interpreted music, playing thoughtfully slow, gently soft, boldly strong, his father's words just echoed in his mind, refusing to be pleased. The criticism was relentless and uncompromising, no matter how hard he tried to modify, to improvise his playing style and technique. His fingers cramped, so even after practicing to complete exhaustion until his fingers knotted up in agonizing, painful cramps with muscles contorting like the twisted, gnarled roots of ancient trees, his father's voice still condemned the efforts as incompetent and not good enough. This reveals the extreme unreasonable pressure he faced as an innocent child just trying to impress his father. Beethoven, a musician without his most precious tool, his eardrums, could no longer pound out rhythms for the symphonies playing in his mind. He couldn't hear the audiences clapping, couldn't hear the people loving him, couldn't hear the women in the front row whispering Beethoven as they let the music invade their nervous system like an armada marching through, firing cannonballs, detonating every molecule in their bodies into explosions of heavenly sensation. Each note leaving track marks over every inch of their bodies, making them ache for one more hit. He was an addiction. So his pain was not just a failed attempt to please his father, but it was also the agony of his hearing impairment, of not being able to hear that how great his music was, how famous he was, how loved his music was among the people. The women would shout his names, the audience would clap, there would be thunderclaps in the gallery where he played, yet couldn't hear them. He just couldn't listen and be admired, and just couldn't feel admired. So he as a musician is depicted as tragically being deprived of his most essential, indispensable asset, his ears and his ability to hear. His deafness also painfully isolated and separated him from directly experiencing the praise, applause, admiration, and cries of his name from his audiences. He was unable to hear them at all, to hear any of his praises, or such overwhelming, immersive power his music has had that it would enter through their ears and just get absorbed in their whole body, in the listeners' bodies. The sounds, the music notes washed over their nervous system like an invading naval armada, firing cannonballs that detonate within the body, bombarding every molecule and nerve, ending in explosions of ecstatic sensation. Each melodic note leaves its impactful mark on the listener, imprinting itself on their psyche, making them desperately crave for one more music, one more note, again and again. So it was such kind of a musical drug he produced, he was able to compose. His music acts as a powerfully addictive narcotic for the senses. And kings, queens, it didn't matter. The man got down on his knees for no one, but amputated the legs of his piano so he could feel the vibrations through the floor. The man got down on his knees for music. And when the orchestra played his symphonies, it was the echoes of his father's anthem repeating itself like a broken record. It was not good enough. So they played slowly, not good enough. So they played softly, not good enough. So they played strongly, not good enough. So they tried to mock the man. So Beethoven was partly an egoist, if we can say, and then he refused to kneel or bow down in deference to any aristocrat, any elite, any human, be it an aristocrat, be anybody from the nobility, a king, queen, anything. It didn't matter. But the only thing that he prostrated himself solely was for his muse, for music, even going so far as to amputate the legs of his own piano in order to press his body closer to the floor and feel the vibrations of the notes through the wooden floorboards as his deafness worsened, because he could not hear his music, he could not hear what he was playing. Therefore, he could feel the vibration, the reverberation that was caused due to his playing, and then he could judge the music. His only true devotion was to his own musical art. And when his professional orchestra would support him in his plays, in his performances, Beethoven psychologically still only heard the cruel echoes of his father's voice, which he had heard while a child, and it repeated that his ambitious symphonies were never good enough, like the stuck needle of a damaged record player, endlessly recycling the same condemnations. So, in utter confusion, even the orchestra would play slowly and softly, strongly, and continue improvising and continue changing to suit to Beethoven's needs and demands and desires, but they were just not good enough. So, they tried to mock the man, make fun of the madness by mimicking the movements, holding their bows a quarter of an inch above the strings, not making a sound. It was perfect. See, the deaf have an intimacy with silence. It's there in their dreams, and the musicians turn to one another, not knowing what to make of the man, trying to calculate the distance between madness and genius, realizing that Beethoven's musical measurements could take you to distances, reaching past the towers of Babylon, turning solar systems into symbols that crashed together, causing comets to collide, creating crescendos that were so loud they shook the constellations. So, repeatedly, when the orchestra failed to meet the desires and the level of perfection of Beethoven, they tried to mock him. They tried to tease him and mock the deaf Beethoven in his eccentricity. The orchestra musicians jokingly exaggerated their physical playing motions while deliberately holding their bows just slightly above the string instruments without actually touching them. So, therefore, they were not actually playing but mimicking the motions and not creating any noise, any music. This produced no real audible music, just the illusion and pantomime of playing. Perversively to Beethoven, in his almost total deafness, this silent mocking imitation was paradoxically perfect music and melody, because to him, music was what he could sense and not what he could hear. Therefore, whether they played or not, he had an imagination of the note, and in that it seemed to be perfect. The speaker explains that deaf people have a uniquely close relationship with absolute silence, unknown to the hearing. Silence is constantly present for them, a companion even invading the landscape of their dreams and night. This accounts for why Beethoven perceived the soundless comedy act as ideal. So, deaf have an intimacy with silence. They are not comfortable in the world of hear and talk. They are comfortable and at peace in the world of silence. Thus, Beethoven was able to invade and conquer the world of quietness too and bring forth music. And when he would be completely satisfied with what the act they had put up, with the joke that they have put up, the confused orchestra would exchange puzzled glances, not knowing how to interpret or categorize this bizarre man. They pondered whether he has slipped into actual madness or remains an unfathomable genius. The musicians thus eventually realized, admitted, and proclaimed that Beethoven's musical imagination reaches mythical cosmic distances far beyond ordinary human limits, calculating the lengths exceeding earthly measurements, and thus they reached past, even beyond the towers of Babylon, the far reaching heights of the towers of Babylon. So, the Towers of Babylon is a biblical allusion and a myth as well. Then turning the all solar systems and symbols and this that. So that is, Beethoven's music takes an astronomical power and scale in the verse, with whole solar systems become crashing symbols, comets smashing together to create deafening cosmic crescendos that shake entire constellations. So Beethoven's music had such astronomical power that it could shake entire constellations and make the solar systems crash against one another until the stars were jarred loose and fell from the heavens like luminous tears weeping through the celestial spheres. So they shook the constellations until the stars began to fall from the sky, and it looked like the entire universe had begun to cry. Distance must be an illusion. The man must be a genius. Beethoven, his thoughts moving at the speed of sound, transforming emotion into music. So his orchestra would eventually admit and proclaim it to the universe that he was a musical genius. He was a genius and not any crazy freak. And he had the power of transforming every bit of his emotion into music. His musical imaginations can traverse such interstellar distances. The musicians concluded that terrestrial distance itself must be an illusion for him. With a scope of such magnitude and grandeur, Beethoven's status as a radical genius is confirmed, undoubtedly. His music transcended barriers, went beyond all territories, transcended all languages. So distance was just an illusion for him. For his music was more akin to nature, where the cymbals clang together, the percussion instruments we are talking about, and like that, the solar systems were colliding and crashing into one another to form his music, and the constellations shook like the entire heaven, and angels wept to participate in his music. So this man had all these emotions of ecstasy, agony, anguish, and triumph, as if joy was poured into music. And for a moment it was like joy was a tangible thing, like you could touch it. Like for the first time we could watch love and hate dance together in a waltz of such precision and beauty that we finally understood the history wasn't important. So while hearing Beethoven's music, joy becomes nearly a tangible physical substance that can be felt and touched. Love and hate are personified elegantly, dancing together with graceful precision and splendor. This makes listeners realize for the first time that historical context and biographies are unimportant. To know the man, all we ever had to do was listen. So here at last the poet just concludes and declares that to truly know and comprehend the essence of Beethoven as a man, all that is needed is to deeply and carefully listen to his music with rapt attention. So again he concludes his poem with the word listen, just as he began with it. And this reiteration emphasizes that we need to listen to our fellow beings and empathize, understand that none should be abused, and those stabs would hurt and wrangle on forever. That the world is such a beautiful place that harshness should just not be a part of it.